Years of war and sanctions mean Syria is in dire need of reconstruction. Foreign funding is essential along with political stability, so work vital to the country's future can begin. How can this be achieved and who will pay? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. So, years of civil war have ruined vast areas of Syria, with international sanctions also degrading its infrastructure and starving it of investment. Syrians face a new political dawn. Many are preoccupied with what's next and what might just emerge from Syria's deeply fractured and complicated political environment. Whatever kind of government takes over, it faces the immediate task of rebuilding a broken country. That will need major international help and finance from foreign powers, some with competing and conflicting political interests in Syria. So what needs to be done to rebuild it, and who will foot the bill? And how will the international community respond to Syria's needs? We'll get to these issues with our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Katia Lopez-Horian.
Displaced Syrians like these in Lebanon are looking to go back to their homeland and build a future. Much of Syria itself will also have to be rebuilt.
Hand in hand, we'll rebuild this country. Please, let's do it quickly. This is for the Syrian people. We will rebuild.
More than a decade of fighting has ravaged cities and towns across Syria. Rebuilding it will be expensive. And investors are already lining up. The Turkish government backed the main opposition group and says it's ready to play a role in Syria's reconstruction.
We will continue our work to ensure the voluntary and safe return of Syrians and for the reconstruction of the country. Turkey, which gave a hand to its Syrian brothers in their difficult days, will also be with them in the new chapter that opened in Damascus.
In the capital, people line up for bread and fuel. Families here have dealt with a weak economy and crippling sanctions for years, and many say they're ready to rebuild their lives and the country's infrastructure.
We've
had a gas crisis, a fuel crisis, a crisis of everything, even a bread crisis. Hopefully things will get better now.
The new administration now has to balance domestic and regional interest as it starts the process of rebuilding Syria. Katia Lopez-Horian, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Of course, rebuilding a country takes a lot of time, a lot of money. After the war in Iraq, initial reconstruction estimates in 2018 reached more than $88 billion, but there's been little to show for it. Much disappeared through mismanagement, regional divisions, and through corruption. In Afghanistan, the US designated more than $140 billion for reconstruction. But once the Taliban regained power, most international funds were frozen under sanctions. An estimated $485 billion is needed to rebuild Ukraine during the next decade. And the cost of rebuilding Gaza is estimated at more than $80 billion. All right, let's bring in our expert guests. In Damascus, we have Sinan Hatahet, who is a non-resident fellow with the Syria Project at the Atlantic Council. In Doha, Tamer, an associate professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He specialises in public policy, including conflict resolution and foreign aid. And in Montpellier, in France, Fadi Dayoub is joining us, the Executive Director of Local Development and Small Project Support, which is an NGO that supports accountable governance in Syria. Welcome all of you to Inside Story. Sinan, I'd like to start with you, if I may, there in the heart of it all in Damascus, where no doubt the intense euphoria and still this sense of astonishment at just how fast things have changed, I'm sure. But people will soon need to turn their minds to thoughts of reconstruction. How important is it, in your view, that this starts as soon as possible?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Based on the few interviews and interactions we had with the local population as well as local community dignitaries, this is exactly what they have in mind. once order is established, is how to run the city, how to get access to fuel, and how to get all the services working as expected. Right now there are a lot of anticipation, hope, but also concerns. The few early steps taken by the opposition has been somewhat reassuring, but what they need to see now is actions that match the words.
Fadi, you know the situation on the ground very well. Estimates of reconstruction in Syria ranging from $250 billion to even some estimates say $1 trillion. Whatever way you look at it, it is a colossal sum. Just how broken, in your view, is the nation's infrastructure?
Well, allow me first to say that I would rather use another term than the reconstruction. What Syria needs is not only its infrastructure to be reconstructed. What we need in Syria is a whole rebuilding of the country. Actually, to be honest, as a building of a new country. That actually starts with what country we want to build, which is what is going to be our new social contract. And definitely there is a need to reconstruct housing, infrastructure, to restart or improve on lots of very important sectors, like, as you mentioned, health, education, but also electricity and water provision. The problem is not to look at this as a very humanitarian response model. First, what we have to do definitely is stabilize as much as we can and take the time to define what is the Syria that we want to build and then how we want to build it. In 2018, I was a part of a group that actually helped Syrian civil society to issue principles on how to build new Syria, how to rebuild Syria. And I think we have to go through these. Definitely, we're not going to wait for the whole political process that would define the new, I would say, the social contract and the new constitution and the new government to be in place. But we have to have some kind of rules because we want to build properly and make sure that while we're building, we're not damaging interests and rights of people. Okay. It's not only about buildings. It's about, definitely, before anything else, it's about building a nation.
Indeed. Tamer, very, very early days in the transition, to say the least. But critical that this political stability is reached before reconstruction, before rebuilding can start, or can political stability only come when the country's infrastructure is rebuilt? Which way round is it?
Nick, very good question. I mean, in my opinion, political stability is a must, and it's a precondition for any viable and sustainable reconstruction process. And when I say political stability, I mean a few things. First of all, as your guest Fadi mentioned, the social contract, or if I want to put it in a different way, a stable and inclusive government that represents all Syrians, and most importantly, has international recognition. We're not there yet, so this has to be more or less agreed upon. Secondly, also, you need to end Syria's isolation. I mean, we all remember the international sanctions that have been imposed in Syria to isolate Assad's regime, mainly the Caesar Act. And this has to be lifted immediately. But my guess is that the international community will be observing and watching the behavior of the new government. Then they will think on this move. And thirdly, and most importantly, we're not done with fighting it. Syria remains a divided country by large. You have now the new government territories, then you have the Kurds territories, and most important, now you have the Israeli factor. Israel is bombing now Syria, infrastructure facilities, and has occupied a new chunk of land of Syria. So stability is a must. We cannot do reconstruction while Israel is on attack as well. And fourthly, and lastly, from my perspective, and maybe Fadi has hinted to this, you need a vibrant civil society in Syria that acts as a watchdog. Syria does not have a history of having an independent civil society functioning within the Syrian country because of the very oppressive nature of the Syrian regime. And for this to happen, you need also to build this culture, the culture of activism, and you need also to invest in educating people and empowering them to have a say in politics and to have a say in their destiny. So this is on the political preconditions.
Thanks, Tamer. Let me bring in Sinan again there in Damascus. And Sinan, this is the thing, isn't it? You need to, I guess, create the conditions for the different parts of society to live together in peace, to create the sense of that physical reconstruction is possible, given everything that's happened in this time. And that is an incredibly complex process.
Yes, indeed. Well, if you look at the previous experience of the opposition in the northern part of Syria, this is not going to be an easy fit. There is a lot of factors to counter in, and there is a lot of competition that will be ongoing between the de facto authorities as well as the NGOs, all looking to get access to their constituency and to convince people. But the good news, I believe, for the civil society in large, that the opposition doesn't have the depth in terms of capacity to be able to fill all the void left by the regime. There is a lot of spaces that needs to be filled quickly within the state apparatus, whether it's in services or also in creating and drafting a new constitution or a new social contract. And I believe that there is a new actor now coming to the surface that we haven't seen and very active in the last few years, which are the large communities in Aleppo, in Damascus, in Hama, that they have been largely oppressed and not able to take part of this activities, and they've been looking forward for this day. Of course, the first few days and weeks are going to be chaotic. They haven't had this experience before, and this is where also the Syrian NGOs and civil society have a vital role on how to engage with these communities and to get them and to reach out and to get them oiled up and working on all of these very critical issues. The Syrian civil society in exile have been very active over the last 14 years. They have went through a lot of this exercises in theory, and I believe that now there is room finally to put this into practice. So as there is a lot of concern, a lot of uncertainty, but there is also a lot of potential and hope.
Fadi, I'm just thinking, you just look at the one issue, giant issue of housing, and we've got millions of Syrian refugees, 3.5 million in Turkey alone. You've got millions of internally displaced people. The sheer scale of return could be absolutely overwhelming. It could be years before they can even be housed properly. Yes, and also you have to add to it is you cannot construct, in a very chaotic manner. Property rights have been violated for years now by the regime. So we have also implications that are not only, I would say, logistical. We have legal implications, we have humanitarian implications that we have to care about. Basically, I think the whole, I'm coming back to your question a little bit, what should start first? We definitely would need to start immediately the reestablishment of a state and the definition of a new contract, social contract. But in parallel, we definitely need to do some steps. As you mentioned, we have a huge pressure. People inside of Syria, not to mention those who want to return, are not having the basic needs they have. They don't have a good shelter. They don't have the good services that they deserve. In this case, what we need is a very prudent approach, very stabilizing approach, but a principled one. Make sure that when we advance in start slowly recovering for the time being, stabilizing, we are not damaging, we are not creating damage that we'd have to deal with later on, not only in terms of I would say, infrastructure, but also about the social cohesion that we have. We're not creating new injustices. We are actually trying to help the current injustices to be relieved. So it's a balance. It's a good balance. As you mentioned, civil society, and actually Sinan mentioned, we've been working on this a lot. We are almost ready. But definitely what we have to do is to coordinate. How can we distribute the roles between us, the de facto authorities, the government, the international NGOs, the UN agencies, and the donors themselves? How we can distribute the roles in order to make this process good. We'll get on to the issue of donors and funding in just a second. Thanks for that, Fadi. So Tamer, you're from Gaza, and there is this distinct parallel between Syria and Gaza, not least in the fact that both ruling parties are prescribed as a terrorist group by the West. How does that fit into the scheme of things, do you think?
Very important, Nick, because in Gaza we have a legit, a democratically, or we used to have a democratically elected government run by Hamas, which was sanctioned by the international community, and this had a major impact on donors' priorities and behavior on the ground. So they decided to work away from the government, to do no contact policies with the government, and plan their priorities in isolation of the government and local priorities. And we don't want this scenario to happen to Syria. I mean, we know that HTS, so far as we talk, it's still labeled as a terrorist organization, but we have been. Apparently there is an appetite by the international community to lift sanctions on this movement and accept it as a local player, as a Syrian player. And so it's important politics are the most critical thing when it comes to aid, because we know aid comes with conditions, with political conditions. Key donors also, they want to make sure that their interests also are more or less visible in whatever aid they provide to host countries. So the devil is in the details, and I'm sure Syria will rely, there will be at some point, maybe very soon, a major conference for reconstructing Syria. Hopefully after we have a stable government in place, and then the politics will kick in. Because aid is not free and has never been free. And this is where I think the Syrians have to be very careful and have also to make sure that they have negotiation capacities to present the interests of the Syrian people and also navigate through this complex negotiation process to protect their national interests as well. So it's a complex journey ahead of the Syrians, but most importantly is unity and representation. If whatever government that comes in place soon in Syria has these two elements, the legitimacy, and being representative of the larger segment of Syrian societies, I think the Syrians will be in a much better position to negotiate and ensure that their own interests are being addressed, not some donors' interests or some international politics.
Okay. Interesting, Tamer. Thanks for that. Sinan, back with you. This issue of money and where it's coming from, we're talking about donors, we're talking about funding, but we've also talked about how much money is needed, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars. Who's going to provide that money? Who's going to cough up? Because there's so many other needy areas, Gaza, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and in a time when the countries of the world are economically deprived, they don't have much spare cash. So who's going to provide the money that Syria needs?
Yeah, indeed, this is actually one of the biggest challenges the Syrian people are facing right now. Actually, if we look at the historical data of the last 3 years, we can very clearly see a drop in humanitarian aid, which was an emergency response. So there is even less appetite now speaking about funds coming for early recovery and for reconstruction. The UNDP obviously have a vital role to play in this. Previously, they were talking about establishing an early recovery trust fund that will be partially and mostly actually even financed by the Arab states. So we were looking to see how this plan will evolve now that Syria is free of Assad and hopefully under a more representative and large and wider representative government. But we also have to be creative. There is the Syrian diaspora that could be also incentivized into investing into the local economy, not necessarily in infrastructure. This is not where money is going to come from the private sector. There is also the capacity, the ability to look at public-private partnerships with possible bond issue. But all of this is at the end of the day really conditioned by lifting sanctions on Syria. Not only Caesar law, but sanctions on the central bank, sanctions on sectoral economy. And this is going to be a tremendous challenge, given that, once again, HTS is at the end as a designated terrorist organization, and how they behave in the last few, in the coming few days and weeks is very important for them to demonstrate how open they are and how they will be running the country in in a manner that not only respond to the Syrian inspiration of liberty, but also to international standards, that they are capable of working with international partners. So at the end of the day, this will be key. And finally, I guess we also have to look at the Syrian own business community. Syrian business community is very active, has been under a lot of pressure the last few years by the regime, and they're looking to reverse the last few years of pain they witnessed, and they are very hopeful. I have several interviews with the business community here in Damascus, and I believe now they're looking to look at laws that will enable them to work again and to reinvest in their own local economy.
Indeed, the Syrian business community itself, very, very important. Fadi, if I may, I'd like to come back to this issue of sanctions that was just mentioned there by Sinan, because we've had this complex and extensive sanctions regime which has played, well, a decisive role in Syria's economic decline. How important is this whole issue of sanctions and the fact that they should be lifted?
It is important. However, we have to be realistic. I don't think sanctions is something that actually can be lifted that easily. We have past experiences. Sanction regimes are much easier to put in place than to take off. It's going to take us some time, and definitely the international community would require some conditions to do that, and it's up to the current, I would say, controlling body that to actually make sure that the conditions are met. But at the same time, I would like just to go back a little bit to what Tamer was saying, and also to what Sinan was saying. I think if we want to own our future, we have to find our creative ways to make sure that we have most of the required funding for building our country from our own resources. And for that, we have to create the social contract. It is a major point that actually will attract people, will make people believe back again in their country and invest their power and energies in them. We have millions of families of Syrian diaspora outside. We have millions, It's not hundreds of thousands, millions. The capacity, financial capacity behind that is tremendous. The forces, the life forces of the Syrian economy are there. The private sector is there. We are a resilient nation. I don't have to prove it to you. Look, we've been waiting for this moment for the last 13 and a half years, and we kept on moving. So we are a very resilient people. Syria is one of the cradles of humanity. Now we want to be back in our role in helping the humanity progress. We don't want to continue our role as consumers of this international humanitarian aid or consumers of the outputs, cultural and economic, of the humanity. We want to be active parts of it. We have proven through history that we can make it. We're going to make it again. It's going to take us time. It's difficult. But let
me throw that. Sorry to jump in there, Fadi, because we're just running out of time, and I just want to go to our guest one last time. Tamer, first of all, so the life forces, as Fadi just said, the life forces of the Syrian economy are there and they're ready to go. What's your sense about the potential of this being developed from within?
100%. I mean, Syrians, again, they're very resilient people. I mean, I don't have to talk about Syrians. I mean, everywhere they go on the Arab world, in the diaspora, they prove to be successful people in every sector. But again, my fear is, again, what I worry about is we don't live in a fair world. And the world has become so globalized and so open and interconnected. So politics matter. And so for the Syrians to stand and defend their interests and achieve their full independence and a whole society development approach, I'll go back to the key point again. Stability, social contract is very important. If they're united, the sky is the limit. If they're fragmented, they will be victims of politics. And that's the only message I want to leave our Syrian people with.
And Sinan, this importance of the sense of identity, especially at times like this, is critical for a nation. And we've seen throughout the war and the ongoing conflict that many historical centres have been very, very badly damaged, such as the ancient city of Aleppo, listed as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, the historic centre of Homs, and indeed the ancient sites of Palmyra. How important is it that focus is put on that kind of sense of identity, the cultural heritage of the nation?
Yeah, this is a very important question. I believe that, unfortunately, it will take time to see Syrian efforts pulling up again to re-give back this ancient glory to these places. But when it comes to identity, I think we will have to rely to the sense of belonging. There is a very strong sense of belonging to the Syrian people. We've been getting calls every 5 minutes from different parts of the world, from Syrian diaspora. Some of them have left the country 40 years ago. Some of them are refugees, and all they are asking, how can we help? How can we come back? There is this common sense that we have to build the country together. We have to put our hands together. I think this will be the cornerstone of the Syrian identity that we have witnessed all along. And I think now with this ray of hope, with the end of Bashar al-Assad rule and this 60 years of Ba'ath's tyranny, there is a lot of energy. How the challenge is how to channel it in the right way, is how to make sure that there is coordination and there is no chaos, there is no uncoordinated efforts. Here also I have to fall back again on the important and crucial role of the Syrian civil society role, because they have been the most organized entity the last few years. They have been able to work with Syrian diaspora, they have been able to create institutions from scratch, and they have delivered excellent services across the board. Their role now is how to expand their mandate and how to work and to reach out to the news community and how to really energize the rest of the Syrian society. And I believe the rest is this tremendous love for this country coming from Syria, from all society, from all communities, including loyalists, including people who previously were working with the Syrian state, are all coming back and re-emerging to help the country stand up again.
All right, well, historic, important times. Gentlemen, thank you to you all. To Sinan Hatahet and Tamer Qarmout and Fadi Dayoub, thanks very much. Thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime. Just visit our website, aljazeera.com. And to get into it further, just go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, it's goodbye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.